shared internally. If you've already not done so, please mute yourself, and we will have the opportunity later on for you to unmute yourself when we have questions and answers, those sessions. But in the meantime, feel free to put questions and comments in the chat. I will be monitoring that. So once again, welcome, and without further ado, I want to get our event started. I'd like to welcome Doug Lawson, the Director of the Student Disability Services, Jody Siker, faculty in the Special Education Department, and Ashley Elrod, faculty in the History Department. So if you will just bear with me a moment, I'm going to share my screen and let Doug take it away.
All right, here we go. Let me set up a bit. Okay, so thank you all for coming. We're going to go through the agenda real quick. She already introduced that. I'm just going to reintroduce myself one more time. I'm Doug. I'm the Director for Student Disability Services. I've been in Northeastern for 7 years, so this January will be my 8th year. And prior to my journey into higher ed, I was a special education teacher for 7 years. So a lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today is from my education background and my teaching background, as well as my experience here at Northeastern. This past spring, I've had 3 universities contact me from around the country because they're scared. They're scared to death. They're dealing with the same stuff we're dealing with, and they want to make sure that their curriculum is accessible to their students. And so I reached out to Liz and Sandra, and I asked if I could put my training out there and invite some friends from the faculty side to kind of round out all of this for all of us. So we're not alone in that. There are colleges across this country who are still trying to figure out how to deliver instruction the best way possible to the most amount of students possible. So that's what this is going to be about. And so this is just as many folks on this chat know me, universal design for learning, my passion. I've been talking about this at Northeastern for 7 years. I can't think of a better time in all the 7 years that I've been here to use these principles right now. So we're going to be talking about what universal design for learning is and the science behind it. And then we're going to take it a step further and put it into practice. We're going to talk about practical application and also critical thinking about how we could use these principles in your remote learning classroom. So that's what we've got today. And then we're going to leave time for, at the back end of all of that, for a giant Q&A session. So you can share your stories, you can share your lesson plan, share what you got. You've got your peers here. Jody and Ashley, they're fantastic faculty members. They're here to support you as well. So let's go to the next slide. So the point for today is to develop a system that works for everyone. And I say that often because people see me, right, and they know I work for Student Disability Services. They know I myself probably have a disability, so they think I'm presumably talking about just students with disability. And for those of you who know me, it's never about students with disability. Yet they are a critical component to making sure your program, your classrooms are accessible. But I'm really talking about everybody, because if you're talking about students at Northeastern in particular, I think many faculty members, when I share data with them, when Dr. Frank Catan shares data with them, they're actually shocked by what the data says in terms of how ready are our students for college. And this has nothing to do with students with disabilities. They're a small part of it, but there's a bigger picture we have to work with. Let's go to the next slide. So like I said, in the next few slides, I'm going to share data that Dr. Frank Catan had shared with me. And this is not, private information. You can contact Grace Massini for this stuff. You can go on the university website. I'm not sure where specifically, but this stuff is public knowledge. The numbers fluctuate, and so be sure you take these sides with sort of a grain of salt, because the numbers shift. We never had concrete numbers for the university. One person pushed together a number, they represent different things. Another person pushed numbers together, they represent a different thing. So we're going to go through these numbers together, and you're going to get the bigger picture of why universal design for learning, in my humble opinion, is the best way to reach a wide variety of students. Let's show the next slide. So this is from last year's data. This was from the middle of last year. So this was collected in January of last year. So this doesn't show the entire year. But when you look at these numbers, they are almost similar to the year before. So for first year students coming into Northeastern, first year students, 44% of them were in developmental writing. So when you think about that, 44% of our first year students were in developmental writing. That means close to half of our first year students struggle writing at a college level. So when you're getting excitement that requires writing, and when you're getting out essays or reports and so on and so forth, the chances that your class is going to struggle with your assignment at almost half. So half of the students of our first year program are struggling with writing. And we could say, and if you think about the numbers the year before that, it was actually a little bit higher. So you're taking 2 years of students and move them to today's time. Half of the first and second year students struggle with writing. Here's another slide. 63% are in developmental reading. So not only do half of them struggle with writing, now more than half struggle with reading. So if you take these two numbers together and you're doing online learning, you lose that human interaction. You take away going to office hours. You take away meeting with your friends to talk about class. You're completely in a vacuum. They struggle with reading and they struggle with writing. So how in the world are you able to teach when some of your students, probably more than half of your students, are going to struggle with one or the other? Here's another slide. Then you've got 70% in developmental math. 70%. So now they struggle with reading, they struggle with writing, and they struggle with arithmetic. These tell you that they are not academically ready to survive in higher education in an online format. Because when you're online, they're almost 100% dependent on the student to be successful. You've taken away their ability to be fully engaged in the classroom. And as the Director of Student Disability Services, I have access to a wide variety of classes because so many faculty, so many students with disability take classes and they use finals, they have exams, and we at SDF can see these exams, and many of them are really heavy in reading and writing. And many of our students also struggle with reading and writing. So here's one more slide for data. Now, if you thought this was a small population of students struggling, if you look at the slide, 31% take 3 developmental courses. 30% take 2 developmental courses. 23% take 1 developmental course. So that's more than half the population of first-year students. And again, the numbers represent this past fiscal year. They're also very, very similar to the fiscal year before that. So you're dealing with 2 full years of students who basically entered Northeastern not academically prepared. So what system do you have in place? You have to ask yourself that as a faculty member when you begin designing your program, your curriculum, your lesson plan. what system do you have in place to address that? And how did you do it without losing your marbles? Because that can be very daunting to try to tackle each individual student and help them individually at every single level. And that's the beauty of UDL, is that it's not so much about helping each individual student, it's about creating a system that allows a wide variety of students to have access while not being college ready to your curriculum. Let's go to the next slide. So I have to talk about that because that's my field. So when you take developmental people and then you also talk about the disability numbers, it's that 60% of students coming in from special education program into higher education will not self-disclose. They will not self-identify. They will not seek services. They will do nothing but show up to class. So for the last 12 years, that's an exaggeration, but from K-12, they had strong support programs. They had an IEP. They had specialized services. They had people who knew their names. They had a file on record that will help people understand their disability better. When they come into higher ed, that's gone. That's completely gone. And 60% of them are not using services right now, which leaves 35%. Only 35% of students with disability who had an IEP in high school coming into higher ed are actually using services. So in your classroom right now, you could have somebody with a disability and you will never know it. You could have somebody in developmental reading, writing, or not, and you will never know it unless you're teaching those courses themselves, right? So everybody else, you don't know exactly where your students are academically or even, I have to say, brain-based ways. So let's go to the next slide. I also want to show this slide to you just to show you just how many students with disabilities could be at Northeastern, and you will never know. Taking the percentages from the previous slide. So if you look at 375, that's how many students we served at SDI last year. Now, that only represents 35% of the students we serve at the university. What about the rest? What about the 60% of students? That equals close to 700 students who are not receiving services right now. That includes tutoring services, accommodation, counseling service, anything. Those 700 students are they're no longer walking around campus. They're now online using a computer with no support system, with nobody to talk to, looking at desire to learn and trying to make their way through your program. Now take those students, again, and combine it with all the other students who are developmental courses. They are sitting at their computer trying to make sense of desire to learn, critical thinking, how to write an essay, how to read properly, how to read for research, all of that. That's just sounding how those who make it through, how much will and perseverance they possess to make it through a single course. So that's what today is about. Today is about helping those students and also helping you, the faculty member, to not lose your marble, but having a system that I feel is easy to use and can be implemented across multiple courses and can be lifelong for yourself as a career. Let's go to the next slide. So again, ask yourself as I go through these slides, think about your courses, think about the way you teach, think about the number of students you have no idea where they are academically in terms of academic preparedness. And it's probably going to be astounding. So how can you better serve them today? And what can you do? So we need to change the way we view learning and then provide a system that addresses it. The way the human mind learns is multiple. For so long, people believe that, especially in higher education, is that there's a right way to learn and there's a wrong way to learn. And the theory of multiple intelligence tells us that's the wrong way of thinking about it. absolutely the wrong way of thinking about it. In so many training sessions over the years, not just at Northeastern, around Chicago and around the country, I take people through that particular portion, and I talk about, okay, so, excuse me, raise your hand if you're really good at math, and then you have a couple people raise their hand. Raise your hand if you're really bad at math. Then you have a big number of people raising their hand, so on and so forth. There's different types of intelligence. According to Howard Gardner, there is no one way to learn. There is no one form of intelligence. People learn in different ways. People also have a preference. Not because, oh, I don't feel like learning visually, I feel like learning auditory. Their brain has a preference based on the neurological structure of the brain for that person. Does that make sense? So our brains are not the same. Our bodies are not the same. Our eyes are not the same. The way we hear is not the same. Everything about us is different. Our experience is not the same. Our educational background is not the same. Our cultural backgrounds are not the same. Maybe some of us don't even speak English as a first language. You get all of this, right? And I also talk about this with students with disability. So they assume that a student who doesn't see can't learn. That's not true. Students also have access to a wide variety of other intelligence. It's up to us, the educators, to figure out how our material can fit into different types of learning. So take a look at the pie chart. Think about this. Ask yourself, what do you reward the most? Who in your class, as a student, would be more successful in your class without any modification to your curriculum? Who will be most successful in your class? And presumably, many people will be like, wow, you're really smart. And I always tell people that throughout my training, when you apply to Harvard University, University of Chicago, Northwestern, those types of schools, those types of schools only reward a certain type of intelligence, the ability to think logically and memorize facts. That's it. Standardized test has to be a perfect score. Your GPA has to be a perfect score or near perfect. Then you get in. But those standardized tests and those high school curriculum only reward certain intelligence. Typically, word smart and logic smart. That's it. That's it. They don't care about interpersonal smart, people smart, nature smart, visual smart. They do not care. They only care that you can read books and memorize the books. And when the time comes, it comes out correctly onto a Scantron form, and you can get those perfect scores. You can be a Harvard graduate, and the rest of the world thinks you are the smartest human on the planet. When in actuality, smart is subjective. You know, obviously, Shannon asks if you can get a copy of this whole thing being recorded. You'll get a copy of this whole presentation. So, or you can just simple Google that. So back to what I'm saying, Harvard University only reward one or two types of intelligence. So who are you rewarding in your classrooms right now? It's a hard thing to swallow if you start to realize, actually, I'm only rewarding a couple students. So think about how you plan your lesson. Think about who's sitting in front of a computer screen and how they learn. The brain doesn't learn the way you want it to. Yes. At the University of Chicago, I used to be the assistant director there. And the number one disability at the University of Chicago was anxiety. By and large, and panic disorders. And when we dug into those cases, it's because those students were trying so hard to take a square peg into a round hole that they would stay up all night, through the night, every day, missing meals, drinking Red Bull, drinking coffee, trying so hard to jam themselves through this very rigorous curriculum. And Ashley will talk about that later. And just barely squeak out a C for the court, and they graduated because that's the only way that University of Chicago would accept in terms of intelligence. So that makes sense. So take this side when you think about it throughout the rest of the presentation. Who am I rewarding? Who am I blocking? And how can I provide a wide asset? And just to relieve your fear, you do not have to plan your lesson plan, your curriculum around every single intelligence. That would be inhumane for you. The faculty member will probably want to quit your job, but you can, and I'll show you how to think about 2, 3, or 4, and you've already come with multiple intelligence. We'll talk about that throughout the presentation. Next slide. So the key to ad hocing the theory of multiple intelligence is having the right system in place. The right system in place. So universal design for learning is not new. Universal design, UD, has been around since the 80s. It used to be an architectural concept. How can this building allow access to a wide variety of people without reactionary approaches? So, and then from an architectural concept, it moved into the hospitals. And if you think about, I share this story all the time. It never gets old. If you think about the emergency room, particularly in America, the emergency room is set up in a very universal design way because it serves anybody at any time, anywhere, except, politics aside, Southside Hospital, things like that. Let's forget about politics. A typical hospital will welcome just about anybody. You could go to the triage, tell them that you broke your arm, tell them you have a heart attack, tell them you lost your eyeball, tell them that, you're having a panic attack, and you get whipped into a room that's set up to serve a wide variety of ailments quickly, immediately. Why do you think that is? Because it's planned. It's designed proactively to address multiple ailments before you even get there. Now, it's by some rare chance that you have an ailment. You come to the hospital with an ailment that the hospital cannot address. Then they'll put you back on the ambulance and ship you to a different hospital, or they'll airlift you to a different hospital. That's very rare. Think about how rare that really happens. It's because the ER is already designed to address any language, any height, any weight, almost any ailment at any time of day. It's all pre-planned. That is universal design for learning. If you follow the system, it's at your classroom. It's set up in such a way that you welcome different types of intelligence. You welcome different types of cultural background. You welcome different types of language barriers. And you've set it up in such a way, simply as possible, to get into the brain, get into the neurological structures of the brain as quickly as possible, and make it really engaging for them. So, universal design for learning has been in the education field for, I would say, about 15 years. It's incredibly popular in K-12. It runs into a lot of obstacles in K-12 because when I was a teacher, No Child Left Behind came out. It was very difficult to implement UDL with lots of government regulation and making sure you take a standardized test at the end of the year so our school doesn't get punished. So forget that aside. UDL works really well in K-12 and it also works well in higher education. University of Vermont, University of North Carolina, Greensboro, Landmark College, University of Santa Barbara, or adopt universal design for learning as a process in their faculty development. It's very much embedded in the way they teach at these universities. So let's go through them. And Ashley and Jody will talk about them quite often. So they'll reinforce what I'm talking about throughout their part. So take a look at the first one. multiple means of representation to give your learner different ways of absorbing the information. So when you give a presentation and you're talking to a camera, what is your multiple means of representation? Right now, there's only two representations I'm giving you. There's a visual and there's an audio. So if you're a good audio learner, you will understand this PowerPoint, this presentation better than anyone else in this training right now today. So right now, today, I'm rewarding the auditory learner as I speak. And that's a conscious decision to prove to you that the only people who are going to benefit from this training are those who can listen, absorb information, wait a day or two, bring it back out a different channel. That's it. This is a typical higher ed online learning program I'm delivering to you right now. That's a PowerPoint presentation with an audio component, and only one type of intelligence is going to be rewarded today, and that is those who learn that by listening. There's some visual component to it, not a whole lot. So for everybody else in the pie chart, you're going to have to wait your turn. You're going to have to step up your game. You're going to have to study harder. You're going to have to find tutors. You're going to have to, think about dropping the course and finding a better instructor that fits your learning style. You get where I'm going with it? So if you make a conscious effort to recognize how am I getting information out to my student, and what are some strategies that I can add multiple representations. When I was teaching K-12 and I gave a PowerPoint presentation, I also included video, not YouTube video, actual video. I also had students teach me. You're going to find out as I go through all of these how we can use multiple means of anything to get students really absorbed into it. But I just want to re-emphasize my point. Auditory learners are going to have a great time today because this is how a typical D2L classroom is set up. It's either a pre-recorded video slide with a PowerPoint and somebody talking, or it's a live thing and nothing else. Let's go to multiple means of expression. This is the big one. So how are you allowing people to express what they know in the way that they know best? So, like I said at the beginning of the program, as a director of SDS, I get to see probably thousands of exams per year, thousands of exams from different faculty members across campuses. And I see what the vast majority of them do. The vast majority of them do Scantrons. Scantrons, as we know, are the worst form of assessment for students to express what they know. For a variety of reasons, the principal among them is that they only reward certain intelligence. So there are faculty members on our campus and across America too who still use Scantron exam. And I also know that faculty, by and large, are not flexible with giving alternative assessments. So, key point, we have students in SDS that absolutely cannot give oral presentation due to the disability. And when we ask, is there another way to express what they know? Most oftentimes, the answer is no. They must do this. And then we go, well, there's another way to do it that still gives you the expression. They still express what they know. The answer is still no, unless I give them an accommodation, which then is law. So now you have to do it. I hate having to do that. I would much rather that we create a system that allows you, the faculty member, to determine exactly how you want to measure knowledge and what channel you're going to allow students to express it and give them options. You don't have to give them 20 options, maybe 2, maybe 3. Just give them an option so that they can express themselves and share the knowledge that they've acquired from you throughout the semester and give it to you to prove to you that they know your stuff. Three, multiple means of engagement. You will find strategy, multiple strategies to tap into their interest and challenge them and motivate them to learn. The most common way, K-12, higher ed, whatever, common way to challenge students is to what? To threaten them. If you don't do that, you will fail. If you don't do that, you will not get this job. If you don't do that, you won't go to this program. That's a threat. Not everybody responds to threats. Wow, there are a group of students who that's highly motivating. They need that kind of check in their life. They want that kind of blunt truth. Hey, if I don't do this, I'm in a funk. Here we go. Other students, not so much. So how are you making your online classroom engaging? And keep in mind, obviously you've taken away the human component. Now you can never go to your class and give a wonderful presentation that's dramatic with flair, touch people on the shoulder, break people up into groups. That's sort of gone. That's harder to do. Now you've got to tap into the engagement in different ways that you couldn't do before. So let me just say, letting students with failure is not a good solution. And I don't say this because I feel that students are too sensitive or this is a different generation. It's never really worked. It shuts down certain parts of the brain from acquiring knowledge. Now you put them in fear mode. And when you get into fear mode, anybody who's ever been fearful, it's fight or flight. Some people fight back. Some people run, or some people freeze up, right? It's the same neurological structure when you go around threatening people. It's sad. Find strategy, and we'll talk about it throughout the presentation, and we can spitball at the end of it how we can get people engaged online to be excited about learning, to be motivated to learn. Next slide. Okay.
Hello. So this is my slide. My name is Jody Siker. I'm a professor in the special education department, and I sort of am lucky because I can model a lot of the UDL, and I'm explicitly teaching about UDL in one of my courses this summer. So some of my ideas are coming from students as well. Thank you so much for that introduction, Doug. I had so many moments where I was like, yes, exactly what I'm thinking of too. This is for all students, right? All students are all kinds of learners in different situations. So we don't know what people are gonna, need or what's gonna resonate with them unless we give them choices. And I'm gonna emphasize that a lot. That's my interpretation of UDL is a lot about giving choices. I'm gonna send a little short video in the chat that I highly recommend. It's about 2 minutes. Don't watch it right now, but you can watch it later and show it to your students as well. It's a little hokey, but it describes UDL in a very clear way with lots of visuals. So a lot of what I'm gonna say is kind of coming from that and just basically trying UDL and seeing what works and going from there. So when you're planning for UDL, this is a proactive approach. So you should first start with what are my goals for the students? What do I hope they learn? What do they need to learn from this lesson, from whatever we're doing here? And then you can see what are the barriers. And I'm gonna put this into action in the next few slides, so I'll give you some examples. So what are the barriers to learning those goals? And then what else can I add? What other choices can I give students? One thing I'm gonna sort of preview here is we have to teach our students how to make choices. I've had several students where the choices are very overwhelming. So they just wanna know, what do you expect? What do you need from me? What modality do you need me to use? So when you're adding in choice, that can be anxiety inducing for some of our students. So I usually start right off the bat and model it with myself. So I start with an introduction discussion. And in the discussion, they can post a PowerPoint. They can write a short essay. They can make a video. And I make a video and I try to sort of model vulnerability with that, and I say, I'm gonna make mistakes in my video, and I'm still gonna give it to you. So it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to try a new technology. And even then, sometimes in the video, students are saying, I am really not liking making this video, but here I am. So giving the choice to, what do you want to do, can also be a little scary, but we just need to kind of work through it and make sure our expectations are very clear and that we're very transparent in our process. So I wanted to talk a little more about representation. So that's the way you teach. That's the materials you use. And one of my goals for my classes is to try to present materials, the same sort of content in different formats. So we have an article you can read, we have a short video, we have a PowerPoint, we have all these different ways you can access the exact same materials. So you make a choice there for our students who just can't sit down and read a 35-page paper, right? It would take them hours and hours. We don't want that. We want to make sure everything's accessible. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute too. And also ways of participating in the learning. Action expression is the how to show what you know. So how to do an assessment. We don't want those Scantron tests that Doug was mentioning. Some of us do, however, like those. I mean, I like a standardized test. That's weird, but I do. So, but obviously many students do not. So we need to think creatively of ways for students to show that they've learned the goal, that they've learned the objective. And we need to sort of revisit that. So some options that I haven't tried, but students might request. I had them write a paper, and one student said, well, can I instead give you a table with the same information in it? And I said, oh yeah, that's actually a really good idea. And now in the future, I can offer that option. So I'm getting ideas from students as well. And then engagement is, why are students motivated? Why are they engaged? Why are they involved in what I'm doing? And are they? and if they're not, what can I do about that? Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So I have this assignment that I'm going to talk through all the I'm doing a think aloud. This is part of explicit instruction. I do this in my classes pretty often, and students really like it. So this is what's going on inside my brain. So I'm having this assignment. So this is in my Introduction to Special Education class, and it's a graduate level course. I have them either watch a film or a book involving a person with a disability. They have to be a main character. There's a very good list on the Iris Peabody website. I can share that later if you'd like. And they have to watch the film or read the book and talk about the portrayal. So I'm really interested in the portrayal. I'm interested in them looking for representation, looking for stereotypes, and really understanding the social construction of disability. That disability is not about what's going on inside a person, it's about the social structures, right? And the expectations and the attitudes and even the physical environment. So I need them to be watching movies, sort of identifying problematic representations, which is challenging because a lot of these movies, especially the movies, are award-winning, right? There's many Oscars shared among movies starring a person or portraying a person with a disability. So sometimes they get caught up in the emotion of the movie. And that's one of the barriers, actually, that they don't have a lot of experience in looking for stereotypes and tropes and problematic representations of people with disabilities in movies. So that's something that I have to, that's a barrier that I have to help them through. They also have trouble with writing. This is a paper that they're writing. I've gone around and around about this. They don't necessarily have to write a paper for me to understand that they know and can recognize stereotypes. They just don't have to. I mean, I want them to be able to have that as an option, but they could make a video. They could talk me through it. So one of the remedies I have that will sort of help frame the other choices that I made with this assignment is, we need to have very clear guidelines. So I have a lot of instructions, right, around this for my more complicated assignments, I not only have the instructions, I also very often use a graphic organizer, and I very often also make a video of myself talking through the graphic organizer. Here are my expectations. Watch this video, pause this video when you need, right? And then go back when you need to. So very clear guidelines is really so important, especially when you're giving options, because I need them to tell me about stereotypes and tropes and tokenism and all the things, that would go along with social construction of disability and oppression and privilege and all these good things. So I have them use this fantastic article. I can share it if you're interested, that has a table in it. I really like a graphic organizer, as I said. So it has a table and it goes through each and every category that I want them to look for, including, did the author of this book, the director of this film, do they have this disability? Or is it just their perception? Because that makes a big difference in the portrayal. So there's 13 different things that they're looking for, and I make them do it like a checklist. So they can write a paper. They can also do more of a table checklist approach. So that's the graphic organizer there. And also some students, and you'll find this in your classes as well, are more used to trying to, they're more aware of these different social constructions and categories than others. So I have them use each other as well. So I have them do a discussion that goes along with this assignment. And they can say, I didn't think that the portrayal was problematic. And then the other peers can say, okay, but did you ask this question? And they can sort of push them toward, yeah, actually that was more of there was a stereotype, or that the author didn't have a disability. So it was, maybe a problem. So I have a little graphic organizer here, and then I really like a table. So the next slide, if you could go to that one, please. It's my table. So here we have and this is just some ideas. And again, I want to push myself next time I have students do this assignment, because I did make them write a paper last time, and I'm realizing they don't need to write a paper. And some of them had bullet lists in the paper, but they could do this auditorily. They could make a little video. D2L has all of these options available for you. It's even in the discussion they do. So students can record a response in a discussion. They can upload a video straight from D2L if they want to. So representation, again, is how you're teaching. And it's really important that you give choices. That's what UDL is. So using different modalities is very important. Learning styles is something that's not as empirically based. So learning styles, you're not just one thing, is what I'm trying to say. Sometimes I'm a better auditory learner when I'm listening to podcasts in the car and driving, although maybe that's dangerous, I don't. But usually I need a visual, but I wouldn't call myself either an auditory or a visual learner. I need everything. I need active instruction at every turn. We're online. This is harder, not impossible. So I think we need to listen and stay open and just keep trying different, things that are out there, right? And sharing ideas among each other. So representation, one of my goals is, as I said, to have different types of resources in there. So what you read or do, and I learned that from Liz. That was very helpful. So like read/watch. So we have ways that we're learning this information. So make sure we have lots of choices. There's the discussion that we had here. But I'm sure I can add more things, right? So I just kind of keep an eye on it and say, wait, I just found this blog, right? So this is still reading, but it's a little more casual and a little more direct. I can share that with the students. Engagement is, well, I had them choose their own, right? So I allowed them to choose their own. Some semesters, students will come and say, so this movie wasn't on the list, but I think it also applies. And sometimes, depending on what it is, I'll say, okay, that's fine. Like it'll be something. Some movies on the list aren't helpful because the portrayal isn't enough. So I don't know. So we have to sort of have some guidelines there, but within the guidelines, they can choose their own movie, or they can read a book. They can read a children's book, young adult book, even an adult book if they want to. Action and expression. This is where I have an opportunity for this particular assignment, because they are all writing a paper. They can make a video, they can do audio analysis. But what else? What else can I add? What other different modalities can I be using at the same time? I do, again, so I'm going to actually have you go to the next slide to talk about this a little more. Thank you. So accessibility, and I'm going to like kind of go backwards and think about the student needs for flexibility, but also clarity. Sometimes those two forces can work against each other. I'm just talking from experience here. So I have some students who feel very anxious when given choices. I have a student who said, you can't give me an extension. I need it to be due on this day. Please don't push back the due date. Please have a specific due date. But I have other students who say, I really need an extension, right? I need a different due date. So you need to sort of know who your students are and know what might cause anxiety. I think it's really important to be flexible and to give these choices. But some students just need to know, I need you to write a paper. You don't have a choice. And it's easier for them somehow. But I just wanted to give that little caveat. It's kind of a strange one, but I've encountered it every time I try to give flexibility and options. And I also noticed that people tend to choose sort of the dominant option, right? So they'll choose the paper because they get nervous about trying something they've never tried before, which is another reason why I try to model it. And I say, well, I hate making videos too, but here's my 12 videos in the course. So back to the top, it's about accessibility as well, but it's also about flexibility and design. So I think I'm running out of time, so I'll wrap it up here. But accessibility, it's important to think about the timeliness of it. So captions are amazing because they are at the same time as I'm talking. They're not necessarily always accurate to watching them, not be accurate down below. So you have to be careful with that, but make sure that's timely. Having students have a book read aloud to them instead of reading takes more time. So just knowing that, we want students to be able to use things independently and as timely as possible and have equal access to the curriculum. So that's what accessibility is. And I'm taking that partially from this hashtag here. This hashtag is a Twitter hashtag and it's accessibility, but there's 11 letters in it. So they put a little 11 in there because they don't want to they can't write the whole thing out. So just remember that it's about accessibility, but it's also about the choices that we're giving students options to engage in the same material, learning the same high standards and objectives, but they are able to choose their modality or look at it through multiple lenses, which is also really helpful for students. Make sure that when you're thinking about what your goal is, that you're not sort of pigeonholing yourself into one modality. So if you're saying, I expect my students to write a paper about representation in the media of people with disabilities, I don't really need them to write though. I need them to recognize, I need them to identify and explain the representations in the media. I don't need them to write. So there's a lot of technologies out there, but I think, and we can talk more about that when you have questions later. And also, we're all still discovering all these technologies. I'm learning things through my children's teachers, because they are using technologies that I didn't even know existed. And then I can pass those along to my students. But we need to be learning all the time and paying attention. So I just wanted to make sure that we're using multiple modalities and we're being creative with our technology. We can still collaborate. We can still have small groups. It's just a little harder, right, in some platforms. Apparently, Zoom has an easier way to do that than Google Meets, but that's okay. So I just wanted to kind of show you what I'm thinking about when I'm, trying to use UDL in my classes. But I'm looking forward to hearing your ideas and problem solving. I think that's the really fun part, to try to be creative and think outside the box and think how else can my students be showing what they know here. So thank you for allowing me the time to talk.
Classic. Oh, hello. Okay. I'm Ashley Elrod. I'm an assistant professor in the history department, and I've been at NEIU for about 2 years now. And I wanted to start my time today with you by sharing an anecdote that has been on my mind a lot. About 4 years ago, I was on a different university campus and attending an event, and I overheard two administrators at that campus in a discussion. They were questioning whether it was a good idea to allow accommodations for a student who was not able to be physically present in a classroom. Could the student still be permitted to complete the course, finish the program, say if they were doing the program remotely or online? And these administrators thought no. They were concerned that making accommodations of these kinds would threaten the academic rigor of the program. So I've thought about this, I mean, for one, just because of the laughable situation, that discussion is in such contrast to the crisis that we're going through today that it's hard to imagine someone making those determinations that we can't possibly do online instruction for this. But I think more importantly for me is the status that this term has, academic rigor. Rigor or academic integrity are really commonly used terms. They appear in our conversations when we're talking about academia and our goals. They're in our university values statements. But I think it's important to reflect on what we precisely mean by these terms. So I wanted to do a quick poll. There is a text box associated with this Google chat. If you could hit either the number 1 or the number 2. Please hit the number 1 right now if you know exactly what we all mean when we use the term academic rigor. Okay, will you please hit the number 2 if you do not know exactly what we all mean when we say rigor? All right, I'm so glad you all didn't call my bluff because I didn't have anything for the number 1s in the group. I think it's pretty evident that academic rigor is a cultural construct, right? These are really broad cultural constructs that have to be interpreted to be useful. So it's important because it's an unclear term that has a lot of power. Right, we have to make decisions about what counts as rigorous materials or a challenging assessment. We decide what is valued as an acceptable demonstration of a student's competence. So as we interpret those constructs differently, depending on our field, depending on the type of institution we're at, and just our individual priorities as instructors, we're making really significant decisions that affect our students, right? Because we as instructors have this authority to determine what skills or capacities, modalities are valued. And I'm not trying to criticize this decision-making authority as an objective thing. It's extremely important for us to have this to reflect the hard-earned expertise we have in our field, to protect academic values like freedom of inquiry. So it's important to remember that I don't have to compromise my standards or my expectations for my students. But by recognizing that notions like excellence and mastery are constructs, I do need to self-reflect and scrutinize my standards and ask myself, do the specific ways that I define these terms allow for universal opportunity for all students to have a fair chance of meeting my chosen criteria? And that's where I think UDL can really help us think through that relationship between the specific standards of individual instructors and the concept of a universal access or opportunity. So I wanted to share a bit from one of the assignments that I have been rethinking, and I'm sure we'll be continuing to revise when it comes to responding to the diversity of options and the individual way we make our decisions as instructors. I'm going to echo what we heard from both from Doug and Jody, especially using the solution of building and choice. That option is a really key thing here. So I wanted to share one particular assignment that both shows some of the biases in how I think about concepts like excellence, and also how I've used UDL to rethink my attachment to those particular interpretations. So if we could go to the next slide. What you're seeing here is an image from an assignment that I use in my course History 307B called The Age of Enlightenment. This is a class that focuses on European history from around the year 1680 to 1800. The image here is a painting depicting a group of posh upper class Europeans gathered around in someone's living room and debating literature. So just a little background about this class. As with many history courses, it's very text heavy, right? It's readings and writing based. But as an upper level course, I also expect students to fulfill that keyword participation by contributing to these improvised verbal discussions during class time, or at least I did before we are moving to remote. So all of this is in fluctuation. And I think that a perfect example of the course emphasis on heavy readings and verbal fluency is this assignment here, in which I ask students to recreate the experience of an Enlightenment era salon. Salon meaning living room. So you might have seen representations of this in movies over the years, like in Midnight in Paris, where they have an artistic salon. But essentially this is reflecting the fact that in the 18th century, the European societies were placing new emphasis on the idea of a public sphere in which informed citizens should participate in community debates and critiques for the betterment of their society. So it's helpful to present this to students as an early version of the sort of modern internet forum, hopefully a little more civil perhaps. And also, like, I think the parallel is important here, that learning to navigate that space of public discussion is an essential part of how you gain access to a very important resource. So the basic way that this assignment would work is that two students will play salon host. They'll facilitate the group discussion with a lot of guidance from me. I would say that the risks of this assignment are that it puts a lot of pressure on students to show their knowledge in a very specific modality or circumstance. Students have to react quickly through improvised discussion. And I don't think this is unique to history. It's common to many disciplines that to participate in the learning environment, you need to have a particular skill set or way of learning in which you are good at reacting, thinking quickly, and expressing yourself confidently. It's rewarding students who are able to do this well, and it puts other learning styles at a disadvantage. It is how I ran the assignment at first. But I've used the principles of UDL to build in additional options to try to correct the biases within my assignment. This is also part of how I've been responding to the big shift we've been going through in our learning environment, going to remote and online teaching. So how do I ensure that students have equal access to understanding my expectations, processing the materials, and learning how to navigate this particular learning environment that we're shifting towards. So let's go to the next slide. where this is a repeat of the three principles of UDL. And I want to just spend a quick example or two on each of these, starting with the principle of engagement. When it comes to motivating students, of engaging them, I found that I could easily modify the assignment to do this if I was willing to let go of some of the control that I had over the content and the decision-making authority about what was important or how to go about it. So opening up the possibility for students, like with Jody's example, to choose from a range of possibilities, a controlled range, right? So I'm moderating the possibilities and providing them the resources to do it. But it allows them to pursue a discussion topic which they find particularly moving or urgent, like political rights, education, religious tolerance, race and slavery, women's rights. So this helps with the element of motivation. They're able to choose the particular questions that the class will discuss, and reflect their own considerations of what is important or urgent. I also think that it is helpful in this sense to relate what they're doing and what's expected to them to some of the skill sets that they have already developed. This is not just a classroom activity, but it is a basic necessity of life after the information revolution to be able to learn to navigate public discourses and to enter into them and facilitate further discussion, right? So I'm able to, if we could go to the next slide, point them towards some of the parallels. They're probably already familiar with other public forums that we have through social media, Twitter. In this case, what we have is a subpage on Reddit called Ask Historians, where people can go to engage in public debate about history. So these are some options for how I've been thinking through that first principle of engagement. The second principle, multiple means of representation. For me, that starts with, again, reflecting on the particular choices and biases within my own field and instruction, which includes a very text-heavy format. So for me, that's layering in additional means of representation, like visuals and audio. I've been trying to do that through this presentation by pairing visual representations of which areas of the brain are involved as we go through these different principles. For my students, be puzzling for me to express what exactly I'm trying to get across to them in terms of public discourse, but doing so through representations in image, such as the previous image that we just saw. Elizabeth, if you could, or Liz, if you could go back one. Right, the representation of the living room, seeing that in historical reenactments like Midnight in Paris and Ridicule, a French film. These can help augment the same information that I'm delivering through text. And also when I provide visuals like charts and images, to make sure that it's paired together with text to reflect the same ideas from the earlier speakers. So I don't think we're able to show this, Liz, but in each of my slides, there's a brief couple sentences or sentence that says image description. And it relates the fact that there's an image there that a screen reader could not read, or that explains the chart I'm using or the image or the graph, in this case, explaining that this is a representation of the brain, illustrating the back half of the brain lighting up in response to multiple means of representation, right? So text descriptions of images, and then reaching out, as I probably will throughout the semester, to CTL for advice about how to add subtitles to my video clips, or choosing video clips that have subtitles in them. I know that this can be time consuming, but I find that it does have a positive impact with students. And as Jody indicated, it's something that we can collect along the way and continue building up. And then finally, when it comes to representing my expectations clearly, it is useful to rearrange textual information in ways that can be more easily processed with different learning styles by using graphs and rubrics and charts in the way that Jody demonstrated. So I use rubrics and clear examples of student work that I can show them to really illustrate what it is I'm asking them to do. All right, so in parting, I wanted to share some of the ways that I have been adapting this assignment. This is a major thing we're having to do, trading our precious classroom discussion dynamic, the ways that students show participation through improvised verbal discussion, having to trade that out for an online forum. Luckily, I got to see that in action through some of the coursework that Liz facilitated for faculty. So that was a great modeling. So this is a really timely challenge for me reconsidering this assignment. For me, the most important change for reconsidering how I allow students to express what they've learned is to let go of this attachment I have to written fluency as being the best measure of comprehension. And that's separate from that this improvised verbal fluency is the best measure of their participation and how they are thinking and processing. I had set up this course in which they are required to do writing at certain moments and the verbal fluency at others without building in the possibility of choice. And accidentally rewarding certain learners more than others. So to do this, one way that I've tried to do this across the board is, Liz, next slide, is a general document that I can hand out that explains why I allow alternate formats, a link to UDL, what kinds of alternate format options there are and what assignments they can use them for. So the three that I've used so far is, of course, the classic traditional written essay, which has been my particular teaching bias. And adding on to that, in some cases, students have been incapable of carrying out the physical writing process. Some students have used speech recognition technology to do a voice-to-text submission in which they dictate their answers to weekly reflections or essays. I've had students who have chosen to do a voice or video recording. I encourage them to think of it as a podcast style. And I really hope in future semesters to encourage students to try out doing a partner approach where they talk through the problem in a podcast style discussion. I think there's a reason why those are so incredibly popular. They really appeal to learners who process complex problems through verbal discussion, unpacking, making parallels, and this sort of auditory modality. And so encouraging students to, again, have a frame of reference, right, to compare this to the classic podcast structure that we see repeated again and again, where people introduce a starting problem and they unpack it together. That could be something that I'd really want to encourage. What helps is to also provide students with an idea of the formatting in an auditory style, that 4 to 5 minutes of speaking is equal to about 500 words. The last option that has been less, that fewer students have grabbed onto it, but which some have chosen to do, is to schedule a conversation with me and to, again, take that discussion style approach to show me what they have learned in place of a written reflection. And some students have chosen that, where we schedule now a video call and we talk through it in the form of a discussion. So these alternatives, just to sum up, have they've proven particularly useful to think about combining these options now. And what I really appreciate is that in contrast to the starting anecdote I provided you with, that they are increasingly more practical and normalized, which I think, as hard as the situation is for us, is a good thing for teaching pedagogy overall. So I want to end here to give us time for discussion, but I would really appreciate your questions and any any ideas that we want to share throughout the room about how we can implement this in various contexts.
Okay, folks, thank you so much to our facilitators, Doug, Jody, and Ashley. So I would like to give folks the opportunity to ask questions or to share challenges that you're having in your teaching, because you have a panel of folks who are thinking through these alternatives right now. So maybe we could brainstorm some things. Please feel free to unmute yourself to speak.
Can I ask you a question from Ashley?
Yes.
Yeah, hello. Thank you so much for you all, Jody, Doug, and Ashley. It was very informative. So Ashley, I'm actually, podcasts, it's just, I enjoy listening to podcasts. They're just fun. So my question is that you gave an interesting statistics. You said something like, correct me if I'm misquoting you. You said something like 5 minutes podcast is equals to 500 words on a paper. You said something like this. Is there like a justified number? Is it based on some evidence, or is it based on your practice? I would appreciate, your explanation on that. Thank you.
Yes. So this is based on a not completely comparable situation, right? So this is based on someone who is, for example, reading a conference paper. And we know that podcasts tend to go at a different pace and may actually, in a discussion format, require a longer amount of time to get to a point, as opposed to if you were directly reading from a linear written analysis that you wrote. So yeah, I think that when it comes to providing students the time parameters, one thing that I want to provide them with if they're attempting the podcast option is more clarity in terms of my expectations. If they want to write out an outline for themselves and read it out loud, I think the 4 to 5 minutes for 500 words does meet the typical speed of normal reading. If they want to have a more discussion style format, they'll probably need more time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
To build on what Ashley was saying about podcasts, one of the things is if you use that as a resource, as a different way to engage in the materials, most of them have transcripts. So the students can read along while they're listening to the podcast. I found that's better than trying to listen to the podcast while you're like talking to your family and making dinner and stuff. So sometimes I say, and you should read the transcript while you're listening to the podcast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Most of the podcasts have transcripts, like the good ones, like NPR ones. Not all of them, but Thank you so much, Ashley, Jody. I appreciate your input. Thank you.
To build on what Jody said, this is true for many YouTube videos as well. If they have captions, you can also download a transcript. And sometimes I just hunt around for the transcript of a particular episode or film clip I want to show. Mm-hmm. I was surprised to see that, like when I printed out, like say 2 pages of the dialogue, the script, and handed it out, I was in class with students, I could see that they were underlining, taking notes, circling, analyzing the way that I hope they're also doing with texts, but that they really depended on that visual resource. I had actually created it only as a way to model accessibility. And it was so really rewarding to, again, reinforce this message that this is not just about particular learners or certain students with disabilities, there was a wider benefit to this particular option. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question regarding, I have a question regarding reading and hearing something auditorily. I was told, you know, in a training development training that they said that, you know, when we are presenting that we should not speak while the students are looking at, or the participants in a training are looking at a slide, that it's difficult to both hear and read at the same time. What is your reaction to that? Because I am really curious. This particular trainer, you know, for nonprofits at Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, that was something that he kind of, you know, really hammered home. And so he would demonstrate it by saying, well, I'll let you read the slide and let me talk about it. What is your reaction to that?
Well, I think if you're reading the slide word for word, you can do them both at the same time. But there is, I think, something to be said about giving people time to process and think, right? So if you are trying to say a different thing than the slide says, it would be hard. You'd lose some people, I think, in that. But I think that there's still support for using multiple modalities at the same time, as long as they're communicating the exact same things, right? You don't want to be throwing a different, you know, balls at people.
I just want to add that if you looked at my presentation, my part of the presentation, you notice the first 6 or 7 slides was so basic. There was nothing to read. It was more of a guide to allow you to follow what I'm saying. Alternatively, when I put a big chunk of text over there, I started talking that and allowing people to read it more. So so many people like to just dump text and read it out loud and keep talking and talking. So I would rather use PowerPoint as a guide to facilitate learning as opposed to a reading manual, because I think we've lost the point of what PowerPoint slides are for. They're for visual representation of what you're getting ready to talk about. It's a guide to a discussion rather than putting a book up there and having people read it and listen to you at the same time. It is sort of a contradiction, so to speak. So if you want to model the way I did it, I put 1 sentence, maybe 2 sentences. I spend more time talking. And then I move on to the next slide. It's 1 sentence again. It slows people down. It gets them thinking about what I'm talking about, as opposed to thinking about reading and having to think about what I'm talking about.
This is Liz Villarreal. I wanted to share a comment. I teach, this is my first time going online, but I also have been registering and advising students virtually since March. And I've discovered a lot of things on Google Hangout Meets. And so I have students that are visual sequential learners. I have some students that really need to hear the conversation. And so what I found has been helpful for me is I may turn on the captions, or if I've actually recorded our advising session. And then I share the recording session with the student, and then I send just bullet points of the things that they needed to follow up afterwards. And sharing the screen has also been very helpful to help the students navigate within the system, because these are students that are completely new, have no knowledge of any IU port, have no knowledge about the ins and outs of our website. So that's been very helpful for me. I've had to learn a lot on Google Hangout Meets and Zoom, and it's really helpful because you can have a real, I think, interactive conversation with the student, especially when they share their screen with you and you share their screen with them. And so I wanted to say that Liz from the CTL has been very helpful, been reaching out, because when this all had happened, I had to learn how to do my job virtually. And so I wanted to let you know, and talking with students that are incoming freshmen, they're really scared. They're really overwhelmed. They're not sure how this is going to work out. but they're on board.
If I can take an opportunity to just chime in here, first of all, thank you, Doug, Jody, and Ashley. Amazing information, really, really practical and helpful. I also wanted to kind of do a plug out for our faculty support mentors, of which we have, Jody is one, Beck is another that are online right now. One of the things that Liz and I were envisioning is that we build this community of support. When you're learning new things, it's a very vulnerable position to be in. We chose these mentors not only because they have different expertise and a high level of comfort with online instruction, but because they've got the disposition to be a mentor. So that even if you need someone to brainstorm, like I'm trying to rework this assignment for UDL in a different way, and you just want to pull in one of the mentors to say, can we chat for a while? Help me think about this in a different way. Please make use of these professionals. I think you'll be very, very happy with that. And I also want to just make a comment that, and I think, Ashley, this is what your sharing reminded me of, when you had to rethink about how you preference or bias learners who are, more language-based learners, or that's their strength. This is really kind of a white supremacy issue, right? I mean, so many of our assignments is really from the lens of what we think of as a standard. And what is one of the wonderful opportunities with UDL is we're rethinking our biases, even in these kinds of assignments and measurements. So how we can help support all kinds of learners. We have a session coming up on August 19th and 20th. We have not shared out yet, but it's an inquiry-based approach to the syllabus. So I would welcome all of you to attend one of those sessions. We're pulling this together right now, but these are the same kinds of things we're talking about. How can we think about practice? How can we, overcome or look at our own biases and what we do to really be ready for this new generation? I don't know how new they are, but the learners that we serve and we want to serve well. I will also be sending a feedback form to you all. So just a call out to complete that. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandra. We're getting some questions in the chat. I'd like to ask one posed by Anastasia. What are some of the challenges you have faced in assessing multiple means of expression for a particular assignment?
I don't know. Go ahead. I was going to say, I don't know if it's a challenge or more of a suggestion, is that you need to have a very good rubric, right? You need to make sure that the rubric doesn't specify the modalities, or maybe you have a category for clarity, for example, instead of writing or something like that. I think it's hard because you need the rubric to make yourself clear and your expectations clear, but you also are getting different types of submissions. So you need to make sure that it's flexible enough that it will cover all different types of submissions. Doug, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, when I was teaching, and when I help certain faculty members, there are certain subjects that are skill-based. For example, business writing or writing classes, there's very rarely alternatives to assessment because it's very skill-based, and you have to be able to demonstrate you have these skills to pass this particular course. Those were challenging because if you're a business writing course, I'm using this as an example, you have to write, and if your challenge is you struggle with writing, then that becomes quite difficult, and that's when we have to start thinking of ways to how can we teach writing better? What is a better way to teach writing that fits their learning style? Quite oftentimes, maybe that person is highly visual and they need a picture of a graphic organizer right in front of them of how to write in a business style or write in the ABA format or whatever format that you absolutely require them to do. They might need a visual cue to make that happen.
Yeah, I like what you're saying here, that sometimes the final product needs to be a written essay, but then we can give graphic organizers during the process. So thinking about like a process product approach, there are opportunity for UDL in the process if we need the product to be one modality.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're about out of time, so I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our presenters once again, Doug Lawson, Jody Siker, and Ashley Elrod. I will be sharing the video presentation, any follow-up materials, as well as a flyer for our faculty support mentors. So thank you all for your time, and we look forward to seeing you at future CTL events.
Bye, all. Bye, Doug.